Because there is a little bit of a shift in the real estate market that is happening right now in favor of home buyers, now may be a great time for you to buy a home. Currently, what I'm seeing in my area, and I'm hearing this is happening in a lot in other cities in the US, is that days on market for homes is a lot longer than what they were a few months ago and a few years ago. And inventory is slightly ticking up a little bit, which means the real estate market is turning more into a buyer's market, which is really great news for home buyers. But unfortunately, many home buyers are still waiting on the sidelines before deciding to buy because of the still high interest rates. Because buyers are still waiting for interest rates to come down and housing inventory is starting to increase a little bit, home sellers are realizing that their homes are not selling in a few days or in a week like they once were. Sellers now can expect their home to remain on the market a lot longer with not as many scheduled showing appointments. And agents and their clients scrambling to get in to see homes and competing with one another at showings is slowly starting to wane. And some sellers are finally coming to the realization that they don't have the leverage like they once did. And now buyers are starting to have the leverage. Because of this, sellers are now starting to offer incentives to buyers in order to get an offer on their home, especially if the home has been on the market for over, let's say, 30 days or longer. So if you are a buyer that has been waiting to jump into the real estate market, now may be the perfect time because you may find a seller that may be willing to help you with your cost to buy a home. And when a seller helps you with your costs, this is called a seller concession or a seller credit. And we will be discussing seller concessions in today's video. My name is Cherilyn Williams. I'm a local Chicagoland realtor helping you build your dreams through real estate. And if you are looking to buy a home in the Chicago area or the surrounding suburbs, please reach out to me. All of my contact information is always located in the description. So what is a seller concession or a seller credit? A seller concession is a financial incentive that a seller offers to a buyer to make buying their home more appealing. A concession is great for a buyer because it relieves some of the upfront costs that they would have to pay, and it makes home ownership more accessible to a buyer. Now, these concessions are typically used to pay a portion or all of a buyer's closing costs, and a seller concession is negotiated between the seller and the buyer when you as a buyer are finally ready to write up a contract or a purchase agreement on a home with your realtor. Now, your realtor can advise you if asking for a seller concession in a contract is a good idea at this time, because a lot of times it really depends on the market. For example, back just a few years ago when there were multiple offers and people bidding for homes with a lot of competition, asking for a seller concession during those times would have been not smart, because why would a seller choose to offer a buyer a concession when they had other multiple offers not asking to pay for concessions? So your offer asking for concessions probably would have been, unfortunately, at the bottom of the pile. But now that the market has shifted to a buyer's market, asking for a concession from a seller is not silly at all and actually a pretty smart thing to do. So how does a concession work? Well, when you are ready to write up an offer with your realtor, you can negotiate a flat amount or a percentage for a concession with a seller. Your realtor will actually include this amount in the actual purchase contract, and there is a specific line in the contract where this request is written. Now, what is included in a seller concession? So I'm going to tell you all the different fees that you could expect when you are closing on your home, and these are the fees that could be paid by your seller. First off, a concession could cover title insurance. Now, title insurance protects a buyer and their lender if another party comes along in the future and they try and claim to be the real owners of your new home. Your title insurance policy is typically paid as a one-time upfront fee rather than an ongoing expense. Also, there are recording fees. So after you sign all the paperwork at closing for your new home, local governments require that the transaction be formally recorded with the county where the property is located. So recording fees cover the cost of filing transfer documents with the local authorities. Part of your closing costs will also consist of property taxes. Now, when you buy a home, property taxes are commonly split between sellers and buyers based on when you close. Often, a buyer will prepay the amount due through the end of the calendar year. However, sometimes a seller may be willing to pay the tax bill through the entire year. So, property taxes are one of the bigger costs when closing on a home. Inspection fees are another closing cost, but often the inspection fee is paid up front before you close because you need to get the home inspected first, obviously, to assess the condition of the property before you continue to go through with the transaction. Inspections are used to document the condition of the property, to let you know of anything that is wrong with the home before you decide to buy. And besides the traditional inspection of the home, you may also need a pest inspection or a well and septic inspection. Now, there is also the appraisal fee, and the appraisal is when a licensed third party confirms the market value of your property. The appraisal is particularly important for lenders who want to be sure that the home is worth the amount that you are paying, because a lender will not give you a loan otherwise. Now, in some states, like in my state of Illinois, they require home buyers to use an attorney to help advise them on all the paperwork and throughout the transaction, and there will be a fee for that. And not every state requires an attorney, so you need to check your state. And in states that don't require an attorney, the realtor is the primary point person to handle the transaction. But if your state requires an attorney, unfortunately, there will be an attorney fee. Now, the last closing fees you can expect are mortgage fees and discount points. Mortgage fees are fees to prepare and process the documentation in the transaction. And discount points are upfront fees that allow buyers to reduce their interest rate, potentially saving a lot of money in interest over the loan term. Discount points are not automatically given, and it is up to you and your lender to crunch the numbers to see if the savings will be worth the upfront expense. Now, if you like all of this valuable information in this video, do me a favor and please smash that like button, comment, share, and subscribe to my channel for weekly real estate content made just for you home buyers. Okay, so now what are the benefits of seller concessions to a buyer and a seller? Let's go over them. First off, for buyers, the primary benefit of a seller concession is the reduced upfront expense of buying a home. Seller concessions can make home ownership more accessible, particularly if you are a first-time home buyer who may be struggling to cover closing costs in addition to having a down payment, and now you also may have to pay your buyer agent's fees if the seller does not commit to paying your agent. And you know what? Even if you're a buyer who can comfortably afford the down payment and the closing costs and paying your agent, you can still benefit from a seller concession. Every dollar paid in concessions is a dollar that you as a buyer can put towards other things like buying new furniture for your home or doing home renovation projects. And for sellers, offering concessions can potentially help the home sell more quickly, because when a seller is advertising closing cost assistance, it can increase the interest of buyers in the seller's home. And accepting an offer with concessions may be favorable compared to waiting for another offer without concessions. Now, the downside to seller concessions is that they can make your offer less appealing. If sellers have competing offers without concessions, they may choose one of those offers instead of yours. And there's also a chance that the sellers may want a higher purchase price to offset the cost of concessions. So an example of this would be if you have a home that's priced at $200,000, but you want to ask the seller for $7,000 in concessions. Instead of taking the $7,000 off the $200,000 purchase price, it would really make the seller's home be at a price of $193,000 because you subtract the concession price from the purchase price. And this would be a downside for a seller, because a seller may not like this because it reduces their net price to $193,000 instead of the $200,000. So they're getting less money. But what you could do to make this offer more appealing to a seller is to put that $7,000 credit on top of a $200,000 price for $207,000. And in this way, you could get your $7,000 credit as a buyer, which will be factored into your loan. And then the seller will still net the $200,000 sale price that they want. So this makes it a win for everyone. So let's talk about some of the limits to seller concessions, concessions because there are limits to how much money you can give a buyer for closing costs. Mortgage authorities like Fannie Mae and the Department of Housing and Urban Development sets these limits. So to begin, seller concessions cannot exceed the amount of the buyer's closing costs. This limit is in place to prevent artificially inflating real estate prices. So let's use an example of what this would look like. Suppose a buyer wants to purchase a home for a market value price of $400,000, but the seller suggests making the price $450,000 and giving a $50,000 in concessions, which is a really great sum of money for a home buyer. But let's say the buyer's closing costs just really only come up to $25,000. In this case, the inflated sales price of $450,000 will be recorded in the record. And because real estate values are largely determined by the sales price of comparable properties, this sale could unfairly drive property values up in the area. So this is the main reason there are limits on seller concessions. Now, concession limits vary by mortgage loan type. So let's briefly review the different loan limits for conventional, FHA, USDA, and VA loans. With conventional loan limits, it depends on your down payment. So for conventional, down payments of less than 10%, concessions are capped at 3% of the purchase price. For down payments between 10% and 25%, concessions are capped at 6% of the purchase price. For down payments of more than 25%, concessions for conventional are capped at 9% of the purchase price. Now for FHA and USDA loans, the seller can contribute concessions of up to 6% for both. And for VA loans, it is up to 4% of the purchase price. So here are my tips to help you to negotiate seller concessions. Now, you must understand your local market conditions. Seller concessions are more likely to be used in a slower housing market when sellers are forced to compete for buyers. In a hot market, when buyers are competing for accepted offers, sellers are less likely to grant you concessions. So be sure you are asking for concessions at the right time. Also, be sure your realtor is a skilled negotiator. Having a professional represent you in your purchase or sale can make a notable difference in the outcome of your deal. Often in real estate negotiations, there is no real winner between a seller and a buyer. The whole goal is to find common ground in meeting of the minds where both parties can agree and have a win-win situation. So when you are negotiating, be very careful that you are not pushing too hard because it could be a real turnoff to a seller and you could lose the deal completely. So hopefully you received some great information about seller concessions in this video. If your local real estate market is favoring buyers right now, it may be a great time to buy a home and include a seller concession. As always, thank you for watching.